All right, let's talk about John Cena. It has been announced that John Cena will be returning to the WWE on Raw June 27th, which is in just a couple of weeks. That will be one night after the Forbidden Door pay-per-view for AEW. He'll be back on Raw to celebrate his 20 years in WWE. Now, I don't have the date here written down, the actual date of his 20-year anniversary. You guys can probably tell me that. I do believe it's in the month of June. That's, of course, when he came out, confronted Kurt Angle, did the whole ruthless aggression thing and slapped him and had a pretty good match with him. Even Undertaker gave him props backstage. Those were great times. You know, I remember the first time I saw John Cena, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? And who would have thought that he would have turned out to be, you know, arguably a Mount Rushmore guy? Began the Thugonomics character, which a lot of people liked, then started getting over it as a babyface, which a lot of people liked. WrestleMania 20, beating Big Show for the U.S. title, one of the biggest pops I've ever seen in Madison Square Garden history. And there's been a lot of big ones. Even the next year, still over, beating JBL for the title, but things were starting to get watered down a little bit by then. By the time we got to 2006, 2007, John Cena was public enemy number one. By the time we got to, because he was winning a lot. And I've talked about this tirelessly over the years. Part of the reason, one of the things that really got this channel rolling back in the day when I started back in 2010 was my defense of John Cena. I had a lot of defenses for John Cena. Took a lot of flack for it. And I always laughed about that because I'm just looking at it from a mature adult perspective because I'm old. And by the time John Cena came around, I had already experienced all the good stuff. I was born during the end of Bruno's run, experienced Backlund as a little tiny toddler, saw Hogan win the title, went through the whole rock and wrestling era, then into the 90s era, then into the Attitude Era where I was old enough to drive to shows, go to pay-per-views, go to Raws, follow wrestlers to towns, stay in the same hotel as them, eat at Waffle House with them, get in car accidents with them. I felt The Rock and Stone Cold and DX pops. I felt Kane's pyro on my face. I joined in the asshole chants to Vince McMahon. I felt the electricity. I brought signs. I breathed in the smoke from the pyro. I experienced everything great in wrestling. And then Chris Benoit did what he did. Right around the same time that John Cena went from being John Cena to Superman. And a lot of these things started to coincide. Fan frustration with John Cena started to grow. And that was when I kind of looked at the situation and said, okay, let's look at the fans who are complaining about John Cena. Let's look at who these people are. Not all of them, but most of them are young. Are mostly teenagers, loaded with teen angst, hormones overflowing, so frustrated, so full of piss and vinegar, so desperately wanting to be an adult and be edgy and want that kind of programming. And as soon as because when they were kids in the Attitude Era, their mommy and daddy wouldn't let them stay up to watch Austin flip middle fingers and drink beer. They had to go to bed with their teddy bear. So now that they're teenagers, they're old enough to experience adult-oriented content, but they can't because John Cena is PG. John Cena is for the little kids. John Cena is a box of Fruity Pebbles. John Cena has lame promos, all of which was true. But what the fans couldn't understand, because the world revolves around them, of course, got to remember that, it's very important. What they didn't understand is that WWE was forced basically to go in this direction. This company was already lucky enough to survive scandal after scandal after scandal. And now they've got one of their own wrestlers who was wrestling later that night for a championship on pay-per-view, decides to kill his wife, his son, and himself. Media immediately picked up on the story of roid rage when it was really just CTE, the years of damage to the brain and skull of Chris Benoit for the style that he worked, the chair shots that he took. He had applesauce in his head that made him go crazy. I mean, if the Owen death wasn't bad enough, the steroid scandal, the sexual harassment scandals, everything that WWE somehow was able to survive, this could have been the death blow to them. And they had to change things up. They could no longer go out there and flaunt this, any publicity is good publicity as far as we're concerned. That's the way WWE used to be. They used to be shock TV. The crazier shit they said, the more publicity they would get in mainstream. This isn't the type of publicity they want anymore. Plus, WWE had grown to such a level that they weren't so desperate and thirsty for mainstream attention anymore. And they had to clean up their image. So many world champions that had come before John Cena had had troubles backstage, troubles with drugs, struggles with abuse, domestic violence, attitude problems, alcohol problems, difficulties politically. Hogan with the "doesn't work for me, brother." Austin never wanting to put anybody over and taking his ball and going home. Shawn Michaels giving up 3 or 4 titles in his history without ever losing them. The Montreal screw job. So many trying to manage so many different pieces of talent, big time talent that were so fucking difficult to work with. Not to mention the difficulties to work with, but the personal problems they had. WWE was relying on Shawn Michaels when he was eating 30 Vicodin a day. Same with Kurt Angle. Think about how many wrestlers have had big-time stars, problems with serious drugs, serious drug problems, legal problems, divorces, domestic problems. All of that stuff was very commonplace at the top of WWE. That's not the type of shit they need anymore. When Chris Benoit kills his wife, son, and himself, they don't need 1997 Shawn Michaels as the champion. That's the worst guy you could have right now. What you need is a squeaky clean motherfucker who keeps his nose clean, represents the company well, carries himself well, really helps cater to the young kids, becomes a role model for youngsters, for children, for a big portion of WWE's audience. They went in that direction out of necessity. I don't understand how nobody could understand that. I didn't love John Cena, especially coming from an era where I saw Backlund, Hogan, Brett, Savage, Shawn, so many, Austin, Rocks, Triple H, Foley, Taker, Kane, so many great champions. To see this guy, it really wasn't for me. I never said that John Cena was for me. All I said is I understood why WWE decided to go in that direction, and WWE could do a hell of a lot worse. Because one thing about John Cena, fucking works his ass off. Everybody thought he couldn't cut a promo. He can cut a great promo. Everybody thought he couldn't wrestle. Nominated for Match of the Year every year. Go through John Cena's history. Look at Match of the Year candidates for the last 20 years. How many years does John Cena have matches on there to be voted for? Every year. Every year. And he got better with age. John Cena has a very strange style. It's different than what we have seen, but he refined it. He got so good at it. By the time he got to 2016, 2017, the matches he was having with AJ Styles and the professional that he was and how he could be counted on in the ring, in big match situations to come through. Every WrestleMania main event he's worked has been a good match. He's been a model WWE employee. He's been a model champion. I don't know if you saw what he did the other day. He came across that fan, a special needs fan or something, who was displaced. His family was displaced due to the war in Ukraine. And they were in like an hour flight from John Cena. He saw their story and decided to go meet the kid, go into his house, sit down and eat cake with him. Did this all on his own. I mean, shit like that is what puts a guy on my Mount Rushmore. How are you going to have somebody like Hogan or Shawn on a Mount Rushmore for all the damage they caused over somebody like Cena, who's really, WWE was really, really lucky to have him. And I went through hell for trying to lay this out. Maybe I could have articulated it better 10 years ago. I'll admit that. But when you look at John Cena, I was like, I don't understand how anybody can't understand why this guy's not on top. He doesn't have to be for you. He doesn't have to be for everybody. I admitted and agreed with a lot of the complaints about John Cena in terms of him like winning too much. Yeah, it gets old. It does. But WWE was already old to me anyway. If it wasn't John Cena, it'd probably just be somebody else I didn't really love. Wrestling had already lost it for me, but I can understand for fans of a different generation who are coming up who just want so badly to enjoy wrestling as young adults, and they're getting hit with this fruity pebble shit. Hey, I get it. I'm just lucky enough that I wasn't born as late as you were, and I got to see all the good shit. You didn't. So, like I said, not every fan was like that, but most fans are from that age bracket, that age group. And this is proven to me every day. When you guys tell me, many of you say, I used to think these things about John Cena. I used to hate it when you defended him, but that was when I was 15. I'm 26 now. I understand. Hear that all the time. So I feel that over the last 10 years, I've really been vindicated in my comments. I'm like, I told you guys you would get older and wiser and see what I'm talking about. You would see where I'm coming from once you got to a certain age. And I also said that, mark my word, 10 years ago I said this. I'm like, fans are going to stand up, clap, and many of them are going to cry when this man goes into the Hall of Fame. The same people that wanted him dead, that said John Cena is a cancer. They used that word, cancer. So disrespectful. As these very same people are going to appreciate him by the time he leaves. They're going to look at his career and say, I didn't always like him. He was a good champion, stand-up guy. Not perfect. We hear a couple of stories about John Cena here and there as well. Not everybody is going to be 1 billion% perfect across the board. But overall, in terms of somebody that WWE can look back on, a champion that they can look back on and be proud of, John Cena is that guy. He's been the ultimate professional. He's always worked his ass off, always come back early from injuries, always gone above and beyond, makes every appearance, puts up with the fans, not only puts up with the fans wanting him dead, embraces it. WWE calls it polarizing, and John Cena, WWE made a huge mistake not turning him heel. You definitely could have done things in his career that would have really spiced him up. He could have done what Roman Reigns is doing right now. He could have done that in 2013 when he beat The Rock at WrestleMania. Turn heel on the fans the next night on Raw and become the tribal chief and tell everybody to acknowledge his greatness every single week. That would have printed money. But they were too chicken shit to do it. They had no balls. So I understand all that. I'm not fucking stupid. I know all the problems with John Cena. What I'm talking about, the human being, the reputation that he has as someone who is just a stand-up guy, good champion, always works his ass off, and should really be a great role model for a lot of kids. When I was a kid, you know who my role model was? Hulk Hogan. Now kids have John Cena. Kids are lucky today that they got to have John Cena as a role model instead of, so many other people that many fans my age idolized that went on to do horrible things. Horrible things. Either did horrible things, said horrible things, or behaved in terrible ways. So many of them. So with John Cena, now that it's been 20 years, I think he had a hell of a career. No matter how much longer he's around, I firmly believe, I've said this from day one, John Cena will win another WWE title. One farewell run, somebody to put over on his way out. That will happen. It might not even happen for 1 to 3 years from now. But it will. John Cena isn't going to have a retirement match. I think John Cena is going to be the type of guy that as long as an injury doesn't force him out, he'll wrestle. I think he could wrestle for another 10 years on and off. In the next 10 years, he might only have 12 matches, but I definitely think he's going to wrestle whenever he can. And I think we will see him approach 50 and still be in the ring, provided he can. Everybody comes back, So he'll come back to take on the next young stud. A lot of talk about his appearance on Raw on the 27th, that he might be confronted by Austin Theory, who many people say WWE views as possibly the next John Cena. They do resemble each other a little bit in terms of size and presence. But I'd rather go with Madcap Moss than Theory, to be honest. But a lot of people are looking at that match. And if Theory does face John Cena at SummerSlam for the title, Theory should lose. He should lose it first and then maybe beat Cena at the end of the program, or beat Cena when they meet again 1 or 2 years from now, when Theory is a much higher star. Cena's coming back. Hey, I remember you. Didn't I beat your ass a couple SummerSlams ago? Oh, yeah, you did, but I'm a much different guy now. Let's do it again. And then Theory wins. I think this is a good way to set. If WWE really does have a Cena comparison in mind with Theory, I really think this is something that you should have stretched for a while. So the very first match, the veteran needs to show the boy how it's done. And John Cena already lost last year at SummerSlam. So AA right in the middle, pins Theory for the win, becomes the U.S. champion, and Austin has an open challenge, Cena has an open U.S. challenge, brings that back for a few weeks on Raw, and just does a little mini stint. I don't know what his movie schedule is. If he's scheduled to leave right again after SummerSlam, no idea. So that could, make all of this null and void. But if he's available, then I think he should win the title and have some fun on Raw before giving it back to Theory or whatever. So basically, Cena's coming back to celebrate 20 years in the company, and I just wanted to reiterate my support for the guy. Always thought he was a great champion in WWE and somebody they were lucky to have, even though I've always acknowledged all of the issues with the booking of Cena. I always refused to take my hate to that level and to take myself to that place, because I thought it was always stupid and immature, and it was lacking the big picture vision that so many wrestling fans lack. Because like I've said a million times, wrestling fans tend to think that the last thing they see is the last thing that's ever going to happen in wrestling. Just look at the reactions after pay-per-views. When somebody they don't want to win wins, oh, Charlotte won the title, that means she's going to die as champion. She's never going to wrestle again. That's the way they treat it in their mind. And I had to deal with so many years of that, of John Cena. I'm glad that fans are starting just to get a little bit more mature now and starting to grow up and say, let's stop being stupid. So way to go. If you were one of those fans that came around, if you weren't one of those fans that hated my fucking guts in 2012 but love me now, I love you too.